environment.
All right, we're going to get started here. So I think we've got it figured out. At least we're going to act like we do. My name is Aaron Maurer, and I'm an instructional coach in Iowa, and I was part of the MOOC. Most people know me as Coffee Chug Booked. If you're on the MOOC, most people don't know me by Aaron, but most people don't know me, period. So I was asked to help moderate this panel, which I couldn't say no. I've now called these people the Four Horsemen after their panel chat yesterday at academic, or their session on academic mindset. But that's what we're talking about today. So I just have a couple general questions. Obviously, we now have you guys here, so I don't want to run the whole show, but if you guys have a question, I think we'll just have a conversation. I think would be the best approach. So maybe we should run through, if you guys just want to quickly introduce yourself. I think people probably know who you are, but just in case, maybe. And then we'll do that, and I have just an opening question, and we'll see where it takes us. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Sound good? All right, so go ahead and start with you.
Sure. So I'm Ed Briseño, CEO of Mindset Works. So we support schools in developing student agency, and some key components of that are academic mindsets and effective learning and self-management strategies.
I'm Carissa Romero with PERTS at Stanford University, and we develop programs to instill adaptive academic mindsets in students. They're online programs for students and for teachers.
I'm Camille Farrington from the University of Chicago, and we have several projects going on around non-cognitive factors or critical factors that matter for student learning over and above what I call everything that's not on the test but matters for school.
I'm Ron Berger from Expeditionary Learning. We're a network of 165 public schools in 30 states, and we also produce resources, books, and curriculum and videos around teaching. Our model for 20 years has been fusing character with academics, making them inseparable. We didn't use the word academic mindsets until very recently, but the part of character that we had called performance character or habits of scholarship is a good fit with this container of academic mindset. So we've adopted that language, and it's sort of, our big argument is that you can't view these as separate things, academic growth and character growth.
I guess I'll jump back in. Were all of you part of the MOOC? Or how many were part of the MOOC? I'm just curious. Some. Okay, good. All right, good. So the MOOC is this conference I feel is kind of like the spring break vacation of 9 weeks of learning, so it's been really good. So I guess the first question I have is, now here we are on the last day, and we've heard a lot about academic mindset and deeper learning and beautiful work. But I guess I'll start off and ask, where have we seen academic mindset in this conference? Whether it was explicit or implicit over the course of these last few days, and maybe that's kind of putting you on the spot there a little bit. But as we keep talking about it, where have you guys seen it happen or develop over the last 48, 72 hours?
Well, for me, I mean, one thing that is very salient for me is this community, to me, feels like a learning community. I mean, the schools here and the people who come here are doing such amazing work today, and they're showing a vision of what is possible today, that when somebody comes into a school and sees what's happening, it's a complete transformation of how school can be different. And yet, everybody's saying, and we haven't figured it out yet. We can do a lot of improvement, and people come here to learn from one another. And that is a great example of people who not only feel like they belong to a close community where people know each other and talk to each other all the time and go for beers, but also everybody's focused on learning from one another and improving, and that's a great example of I belong to a learning community.
Yeah, I think that I've been thinking about this obviously a lot while I've been here, and I think just the space that we're in makes it really easy to think about that. So there are all these, this beautiful artwork on the wall throughout the school, the middle school, and the high school, and it's clear that High Tech High really cares about making sure students feel like their work is meaningful. So a sense of purpose and relevance is really obvious just as you walk around the school. And I think, this conference I think in all of us, in our own work, makes us feel a lot of these academic mindsets. So like Ed said, we feel like we're part of this learning community, so it's fostering a sense of belonging. And we're all growing together, hitting on a growth mindset. And we're having examples of how our work has been successful, helping us feel a sense of efficacy. And I think kind of the purpose and relevance is pretty clear. It's obviously meaningful to all of us to impact student achievement.
It's been interesting to me that people are at all different kind of levels of familiarity with the terms academic mindsets and those. But so some people have been thinking about this for years, and some people kind of, this is new terminology stuff, but everybody immediately gets it. Like, that makes perfect sense, and everyone, I think, really resonates with what people know about learning and with kids. And so it's been interesting. Yesterday we spent most of our day doing presentations or workshops around academic mindsets rather than getting to be on the other end of things. But so it's just really interesting that people are at really all different spaces in thinking about this, but that it just makes sense and resonates with what people know about kids. That obviously it matters how they're experiencing their classrooms, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their work they're asked to do in terms of their willingness to engage in it. And so I think it's just it's been interesting just how it, it just resonates because it makes sense with practice.
I guess I've been really struck that there's lots of different ways you can construct constructs for this area of dispositions or competencies for kids. The ones that were chosen as the 4 academic mindsets are ones that I think you could have chosen others a little bit, but I'm fine with the ones that were chosen, and I've embraced them. And one of the things that that's really struck me is that Camille and I have talked a lot about the sense that I can succeed at this is actually dependent on the belonging and purpose one. That one's notion that I can succeed at this is not a fixed notion of your own capability. It changes when your sense of belonging and your sense of purpose changes. So the I can succeed at this for me at this conference is around teachers coming into a different paradigm of teaching that's a little intimidating, and school leaders and trying to think, could I succeed in bringing this back to my setting? And where I've seen traction here is that High Tech High is being such gracious hosts that people feel like they belong here, that people feel like they're part of a family, even if it's their first time in this building or first time in this community. It's a welcoming community, and the structures make people feel safer. And secondly, that there's a deeper purpose here that I think resonates with people. And I'm going to be bold in saying everyone says that there's a purpose to learning and a purpose to educational conferences. And in fact, every school district says we serve kids, or we're here in service of kids. But to me, that's about the equivalent of we proudly serve on the Starbucks thing. I feel like saying we're all in service of kids is just a catchphrase that everyone says. And I think there's a different sense here, that there's a more noble purpose here, that this is not about just that's the job of this is of course we serve kids, but that there's a part of kids that is not, a capacity in kids that's not being recognized in many schools. And that this is what we want for our own children, for our own grandchildren, to have their potentials unlocked in a whole different way. There's a deeper and more important purpose that I think motivates people here. And so I think that's why they're willing to take risks. And the last thing I'll say is, my first session, even though I was leading it, I wasn't doing much talking. It was people handling lobsters and measuring lobsters and creating data sets on lobsters. And people were really out of their comfort zone a lot. They were afraid to touch the lobsters. They were afraid to deal with data. They were afraid to do artwork. But I think they stepped up because there was belonging and purpose, because it was like we were all in this together. We all want to get good at what I think is a pretty noble mission. So anyway.
Yeah, to piggyback off that too, I think for me it was that very first day where I think what kicked it off, that academic mindset piece, was we were placed in the role of a student right away. For one whole day, we had to remember what it was like to be in a classroom or a setting that was uncomfortable, you know, and challenge. I was in the robot one. I've never soldered before, and the first thing I did was burn my finger. And then a little bit later, the switch didn't work, and I was ready to chuck my robot. You know, I'm like, this is what my kids go through every day.
Yeah.
And so I think that was, for me, like the epiphany moment, just to remember what it's like to be a kid and not the person in charge going, here's what we're gonna do, and you know, here's this great project, because it may not be great guys and kids. But if we reverse that, this is more of a personal question, and I brought this up to Ben earlier just right before, because academic mindset is always talked about so much with kids and getting them to grow and learn, which is great. But I look at my middle school where we've switched to project-based learning, and as much as we need kids there, how do we get educators there? I mean, these educators, people here, I think, get it, because that's why they're here and they're learning and they're willing to take part in this. But I go back to my building on Monday, of my 70 plus staff that I have, they're awesome. I get to work with them on a daily basis. Not all of them have that. So how do we transfer and help adults develop that? Because if they're not in that mindset, how are they going to get their students? You know, and I think that's the big roadblock that I see is just how do we get our staff on board to see that way so they can infiltrate that into their classrooms, students are smart. And I don't know if there's necessarily a clear-cut answer, but I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
So we've been working with a group of teachers. So that's, first of all, the kind of million-dollar question, because I think that obviously teachers and the adults in the building are the ones who kind of set the standard for what learning should look like and what a lifelong learner is like. And obviously their beliefs about their kids' ability is probably the first limit to what their kids are able to do or what they're going to ask their kids to do. So we've been working with a group of 10 teachers. We brought a group of 10 teachers with us here, working with a group of about 35 teachers in Chicago to think about how do they take the ideas about academic mindsets, learning strategies, and apply them in their own classrooms. And a lot of it is about the teacher's own mindsets of believing they can do it. And there's two sets of things going on there. I think it's one, what they believe about their children and what the kids in front of them are really capable of doing, both because of the circumstances of their lives and because of their prior knowledge. And then there's also the teacher's thoughts about what are they capable of doing given the constraints of their working environments and the challenges that face the kids in front of them. And so it's, you know, so it's kind of a hearts and minds thing, both in terms of their beliefs about themselves and their beliefs about students and beliefs about learning. And I think that under challenging circumstances, people revert to what they know and their own comfort zone. And we all went through school. We all went through, most of us went through really traditional schools. And I think particularly teachers in traditional schools, it's very difficult to kind of break out of that mold because it's so reinforced around you all the time. And so our strategy, I don't know if this is the right way, but what we've been working on is just a combination of trying to get people a little bit out of their comfort zone, exposure to different models, so they're all here to see other things that schools are doing around the country, and a lot of both, well, try this out, try out this little thing, kind of little successes in your classroom, because it's exactly the same thing as what we would think if you're trying to get students to do something out of their comfort zone. I mean, I think it's really kind of the same sets of things, having kind of clear goals, what we're trying to accomplish, feeling supported, like you're going to be able to do it, and there's people who have your back, getting feedback as you're trying things out that lets you know, does this seem to be moving in the right direction, and being part of a community that's trying this out together. And so so ideally you have a school that's creating that community for the teachers within it, but I think teachers that are kind of one-off, but teachers in a school where the rest of the folks aren't really going, that really need to find that community somewhere else to move them forward. But it's probably works, you know, kind of as above, so below, whatever, however it works to support kids to develop positive mindsets and really try scary stuff is what we're trying.
Could you, I'm really intrigued by the idea of applying that to our current context right now, sort of in the moment. And what I'm thinking about is that here, one of the things I've experienced is a whole gamut of that tension that we're talking about between fixed and growth, or however you want to frame it, between old and new. And I've seen it here. I've been in a session where it was very much like the lobster session. We're just going into this. And then I was in one yesterday where we spent half an hour having PowerPoint slides read to us. And that tension between those two things is like, I mean, you know, how do you hold that? How do you hold the idea that, you know, an academic conference is supposed to be sitting there and watching a PowerPoint slide as people read slides to you? And yet, you know, and how do you do that? How do you hold that tension?
I'm a tech person, I don't know that I have the answer to that.
Is to adopt these practices and how to help them understand which practices to adopt for a number of reasons. One reason is that, like Camille points out, we don't really know the answers to the best way to do that. So a lot of the research on academic mindsets has come out of psychology. And so they're really focused on changing students' beliefs. And so I think, unfortunately, we haven't focused as much on what we can do to help the teachers foster these beliefs. And we're just starting to do that now. So we're working with a number of math teachers in San Francisco to try to teach them about the research and give them suggestions about things that they can do in their classroom. And we're trying to focus on really simple things, so downloadable activities that they can just take with them and do tomorrow. And I think that's important for a lot of teachers that aren't like the teachers here, because not every teacher feels like they can change the structure of their whole school. So you really need to give them, I think it's good to start with simple things to do, like how can you just change your language when you are giving back an assignment. So I guess my answer would be start small so that people can see the impact and then build on it.
And I agree with what Camille and Carissa have said. I would add that I think a powerful way to go about it is to start by a vision exercise or values exercise, a purpose exercise meaning a large, long, hard, constructivist exercise to revisit what we want to do in school. Why are we here? Why did we become teachers? What outcomes do we want in students now and when they graduate? And because sometimes we come to these conferences, we might get energized about how important academic mindsets are, and we say, yes, you know, we need to have that. Obviously, we need to start with ourselves individually, and then we say our colleagues need this too, and if we're a team that was cohesive around building mindsets, that would be so great, and for students had a growth mindset. And there's all this pressure when we get home, when we get to their schools, there's all these pressures for all these things that we need to do, and everybody's really busy. And then we say, like, how do we do this? How do we change the mindset of my colleagues right now? And it's hard. Like, if people have pressures for other things and they have to do certain things that are already on their plate, it's hard if you've lost that sense of why you're here and what you want in students. I think if as a team you start reflecting, what is this school about? What do you want students to become? And then how, you know, gradually, how do we get there? And then if that team identifies academic mindset as something that's important, then you can start discussing, like, how are we going to go about this? And I think it's a long process. I think that's the most powerful way to do it. And it is not an easy thing. But when you start in a school like Michael did, he had the privilege of doing that because he was starting in school. You can do that in changing a school culture. It's more difficult, but it needs leadership. It can come from a subset of the teachers, it can come from the school leader. But there's got to be some way to get everybody to make a joint decision of what do we think is important and what are we willing to do to get there.
I would just add that everything everyone said makes sense to me. I would also say that if we want to change the paradigm of teachers, that their job is not to stand in front and put information in your heads, but to create an experience where kids feel like they need to know new stuff and they need to get involved, that we can't set up professional development with people listening to PowerPoint. And
I think it's the same thing.
you know, in expedition learning, what we've done is try to build experiences like the lobster one, or the ones where it's discovery based, and kids and the students, whether they're teachers are dying to know more stuff, and it's a whole different locus of the work. It's not you as the expert,
Right.
but you as the convener of that. And it's hard for teachers. It puts them out of their comfort zone. We try to create the kind of sense of purpose and belonging that Eduardo was just describing first, but then to get teachers to dive in. And I think that was the intent of this conference. And we actually, when we have our national conference, we vet every project proposal, that if it sounds like a lot of PowerPoint, it either doesn't get accepted or it gets revised to become active. We have a standard where it has to be, maybe what is it, 75%, 80% active work. Only 20% of the time can you be talking to other people. And that was the same intent here. We don't always succeed with everyone. In a conference with all our classes, a couple times we find one that somebody falls into the old pattern. But the intent is that it's not sitting and listening to PowerPoint slides. It's really active, making sense of learning together. And I think teachers need to go through that uncomfortable process themselves. And then at the end of the day, they think, okay, it worked for me. I could do it with my kids now as well. So.
And I think we need to give up on the idea, because it's always kind of the counterfactual. Last night at dinner having this conversation, but the idea of teachers are really afraid to give up because the time it takes to do the activity, I can present way more material in the time it takes. And the idea that, well, I got to cover all this stuff without realizing, like, well, what fraction of the people who are listening are going to actually retain any of it, right? And so the idea that we're, I think, always fighting against is that the traditional way is effective. Right?
That assumption that it is.
The
yeah.
assumption that it's effective, right, exactly. And so that, well, to instead switch over and have people do activity and only cover this much smaller thing, then that seems like that doesn't make any sense, because, I'm only going to cover this when I normally cover this, and so that's not a good trade. But yeah, if you think, well, I'm going to cover this, but they're actually going to get this, then maybe it's better that everybody deeply gets, something than that only 10% of people get, because, and you can tell just by grades in traditional schools that the number of people who get everything covered, everything that has been presented, percentage of people who get it is a very small percent. Everybody else kind of stumbles through knowing very little. So I think it's always helpful to think about what's the trade-off. What are you really giving up? It's not much.
One thing Eduardo brought up yesterday in his session was the false dichotomy between you either do this progressive work or you do this lecture work. And the piece around, like John Dewey, it's not an either or, but a both and. And so how do you guys address that in the various work that you do with teachers?
I think that's a great question. Good point, Eduardo. I was thinking as we were having this conversation that there's a place for both types of presentations and learning. So I'm going to a research conference next week. I think a lot of people are going to AERA. And if I tried to do a deeper learning style presentation, that wouldn't be good and it wouldn't fit the goals of the conference. The point is to let people know in like a brief soundbite what's the latest research that's come out of our lab. And I don't think I'd be able to do that in this kind of session, at least not in the 15 minutes that I have.
Okay, you guys plot the graphs.
Right.
Where did you find the problem?
You told me what the finding was. But I think, if we're talking about how to educate our students, and we're trying to model that, then the place, that's a good place to do these kinds of deeper learning activities. So I completely agree. It's not an either or, and even in the classroom, it's not an either or. We want to teach our students to be able to give presentations as well. So part of what we did in the lobster session was we actually presented, and that was useful for us. So I guess in terms of in the classroom, it'd be nice to get students to do a little bit more of that and teachers to do a little bit less.
Yeah, I think for me, how learning happens, there's doing activities, which is more like creating houses and going out there interviewing people or inventing things, hands-on things. And then there's sense-making activities that look more like traditional schooling. It doesn't it's like discussing, it's like creating theories and frameworks and trying to figure out what can we conclude from our experiences and how can we apply it in other situations. And what we tend to do in traditional schools is we just do the abstractions, and students don't have the experiences to have the context to make sense of those abstractions. And so I think one of the powerful values of project-based learning is that it gives students those experiences that form the context so that they can make the most out of those academic discussions and analysis and abstractions and generalizations. But if you need, so just doing the abstraction doesn't work, but I think just doing activities also doesn't work. You can build a house and you will learn some great things from building a house, but you can learn a lot more if you also do some reflections and you study things that people know about building houses, and you interview experts and you ask them about what worked and what didn't work, what could we do better next time. And I think the same is true of building academic mindsets. So mindsets are beliefs. There was when I was in grad school, I was studying a project with a peer of mine, another student, and at some point he said, I have a philosophy that I lead with trust. When I meet other people that I don't know, when I meet them for the first time, I think it's best to trust them and start from that trusting place. And then they react in a way that is trusting to me. And then if we both turn out to be good people and people that are worth collaborating together, then it gets to be the best possible relationship. As opposed to if I start from a point of no trust, and I believe that people need to earn their trust, then that gets us into a cycle where we don't get to that maximum potential activity. And I had, at that point in time, that was creating a theory, a framework for a lot of experience that I had over my life of meeting new people. And I had never thought about that. I had met so many people in my life. I had so many doing experiences around meeting people. And I had never concluded this very important lesson that I believe very strongly today, which is that I need to lead with trust. And I had implicitly learned to lead without trust, which was not working for me. I had never realized it. And so I think with mindsets also, we have all these experiences that are creating implicit learning. Sometimes it's like confused implicit learning because we're getting mixed messages. We need those experiences, but we also need the explicit sense-making of the language to really call it out and study it so that we really...
Ridiculous structure.
I agree.
I think sitting and listening to people's PowerPoints is no different than reading their papers and their abstracts. I don't know why it's even done. I don't think that learning goes on in those. I think it's people's chance to talk about their research publicly because it's a structure. It's like giving honorary awards, basically, you get to present to your colleagues. It's not a learning experience, really, for people. And you could just read those things. And I think
That
that...
would take too long.
Read the abstracts. I mean, sorry. I think it's ridiculous. And I think it's the tradition that we're trying to fight. I'm totally against that structure. I think that's what we're trying to break, that paradigm. And I think that, yes, Dewey would suggest a fusion of these things, but it's a fusion of attention to giving kids content and conceptual frameworks and the actual doing. But the giving of content and conceptual frameworks doesn't have to happen in a lecture format. In fact, it works best when it's not a lecture format. So when we did lobsters, we did data analysis. But all I did on the data analysis was people would put up charts, and I'd say, do you think there's a trend here? And Ed and Krista would argue about it. They were students in the class. Most of what the students learned was from listening to them argue about the data sets. It wasn't, and all I had to do was sort of make sure the conversations brought out the important points. It was group construction of understanding. So I think the combination of conceptual frameworks and knowledge being important, along as, and the making sense, as you're saying, Eduardo, as long as the doing, you need a synergy of those two. But that doesn't mean you lecture for part of the time and then you have them do things for part of the time. It means you attend to those things, to group construction of the broader issues, as well as having them do, in a very non-AAR way.
As you talk about structure, I think like in a public education setting where I am, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to explain deeper learning, and I'm going to try to explain beautiful work, and I'm going to try to make a feeble attempt at academic mindset. But really, I had this discussion last night with another teacher that's here. It's a feeling, like you just know, like you just see it, you know it, you know, it's not something that I feel like I can like write a paragraph, here's what it is, and then boom, you know, it's just, you see beautiful work, you go, there it is. This deeper learner, this academic mindset in a kid, he's got it, you know. But we're still stuck in an old school structure, you said structure. So, and the structure is every year we have a whole new onslaught of things that we have to do, that next greatest thing, and you have to put numbers behind it, which I know is a whole other topic. But as we talk about these three things, beautiful work and deeper learning and academic mindset, and trying to push that in, but at the same time also knowing that when people bridge that, I mean, I know obviously the thing is you just fight the battle. I mean, I know, but are there things that you have seen go on? Because I feel like I've talked to people here and they're like, oh, I built a school. Created a charter. Right? Well, in Iowa, that's not, I mean, I would like to say I'm going to go build a school, but it's just, no one's going to come to the school. Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh yeah, this is a whole new, great, but it's not going to happen. So, I mean, what are ideas, solutions? I don't really know what I'm asking, but I'm asking for help maybe. So another selfish question, I guess.
I think first of all, you can put numbers behind these things. So there is plenty of research to show that this kind of learning, that academic mindsets, does lead to higher student achievement. And you know, even though we don't know how certain practices affect achievement, we can know that. So we could, assign a group of classrooms to learn about how expeditionary learning structures its classroom, and we could ask them to try that out, and we can assign another half of classrooms to not do that, and then we can see what happens. And these are studies that are going on, not specifically with expeditionary learning, but I think it's important to recognize that sometimes we can put numbers behind these, and we can also see powerful examples of deeper learning that maybe don't have numbers behind them, but carry a lot of weight for people because it's obvious that this kind of learning is happening, like the presentation we saw by the students yesterday. So I think there are a lot of ways that we can make this case, and in many different ways that will appeal to different people.
I have a question. Do you think maybe the numbers and like the experience? I tend to agree with you about these conferences, and there are any number of ways that we reach teachers, and many of the ways are really through those meetings, whatever they are, and however they collect together. But if it's just more of what we've been doing, and your definition is not going to be nearly as powerful as their experience.
Right.
And if they experienced it, and then later tried to define it, and then started taking a look at the numbers, then it becomes a deeper understanding of what they just experienced. So it's almost a little bit of a manipulation of getting the experience in their minds and in their experiences, so that they want to explore it. I don't think it's anything you can make happen, but I think you can set up the context for something to happen with them. And wherever they gather, there is that opportunity. I'm just wondering how you see people actually begin to shift a mindset when they seem to be built on kind of what you're talking about. I've worked with a lot of teachers, very traditional thinking. And it was very slow and a lot of conversation. But I don't know the typical manner that you see that early shift begin to happen.
Well, and in terms of the numbers, I don't think teachers need numbers. I don't think that's what you're saying either, that teachers need numbers to make that shift. In general, teachers are probably not particularly happy to have to always be focused on producing numbers. And definitely get your point that if you have that experience, then, and then it always feels reassuring to have the numbers to back up that that's something legitimate, it kind of legitimates that experience. But as Chris was saying, like, you can put numbers on some of these things, that we can try to measure some of these mindsets particularly, but I am much more interested in that, I have to say, from a research perspective than from the use of that in practice. I think that there's a lot we still don't understand about what kinds of classrooms and classroom practices mindsets. Is it important that everybody has all four mindsets? If you have one, is that good enough? If you have, are there some kids that need this one in order to engage, and other kids need this? And those are all questions we don't understand at all. What's the normal trajectory of a mindset over from a young kid up through college? And we don't have any way of knowing any of that yet. And so from a research perspective, I think that's really important and really interesting. But I am and we're actively engaged in that work, but I'm and we're doing this in conjunction with schools that want those numbers back. And as partners with the schools, we want to work with them to think about what do these numbers mean for you? Like, just because you got a number, that's not, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with this data? And we also are very reticent to give back numbers. So, for example, take student surveys. We measure all the students in a school, or measure classrooms, and then the school wants those numbers back. Well, we could say your students got, this score on relevance or belonging, but that might not actually mean anything yet. Like in terms of, or their score on our particular survey's measure might not mean anything. Until we do kind of further research and really understand, they have that, and that's really seems to be associated with getting higher grades despite what you would think the grade they would get given their skill level. To really kind of dig in and make sense of those things from a research perspective, I feel is our responsibility to not just, we can give people numbers, but that is not necessarily helpful. So I feel a strong sense of responsibility to not just put stuff out there just because it makes one school feel better than another because they look better on this number. That might be a meaningless number. So,
you all represent in your own practices igniters of brush fires of deeper learning or innovation, transformation, whatever we call it. And I would argue or posit that probably everybody in this room and most people at this conference represent at their own schools brush fires of transformation. But we, I think, also might agree that given the historic rate of change in schools, that these the opportunity or the potential future point where those brush fires are going to turn into a true conflagration, where we've made a radical change, where there's been a significant change from traditional to whatever we want to call it. Historically, we would see this is going to take a long, long time. We're going to sacrifice another generation or two that we're probably faced with now to get where everybody in this room wants to get to, beyond a very narrow or thin layer of educators who get it, who are going to go back on Monday and beg once again for this to happen. Any moonshot thinking that has taken place in your heads?
Sorry, what is moonshot mean for the English language learner?
The Hail Mary pass. How can we? It's something that could radically change the rate of adoption of what we know and what Dewey was telling us 100 years ago is great learning.
Two ideas. One is I really like where Jennifer was going of, can we create a scalable experience that everybody can really experience how different things can be. Like everybody at the Lobster session on Wednesday, or experienced how different learning can be in a way that is transformational. Or I think the people yesterday who we asked them to do a painting, and they weren't very engaged in that. And then when Ron specified, where we're actually going to do this piece of art to thank somebody here who helped organize the conference. And then there was a big authentic purpose for it. People felt very differently. And it's an experience that can change what you'll think is possible. And so, Jennifer's comment inspired me to think, like, at the Deeper Learning Conference next year, could we somehow come together and think, is there a way to create a Ron Berger experience that's scalable, there's a movement that can really, that can really touch millions and millions of people. I would like to be in that session trying to come up with that.
Me too.
The other idea is, in traditional assessments where we teach content and things that are more like facts and procedures, this type of learning is not as transformational in those measures as traditional learning is more cramming of those facts and procedures. When you assess kids for critical thinking and problem solving and creativity and ownership over their own learning and their paths, then there's a huge change in what you see in kids, as we saw in the students yesterday who presented. And with the Common Core, I think that the assessments are more like the critical thinking and the things that the students who are coming out of these schools are going to show a huge improvement, I believe, over the other schools out there. And that data could, I hope, inspire people to really take a close look at these models. And there's Common Core, and there's other, even Common Core Plus assessments, which could be, and a third might be like a big leadership movement, like FDR or like Jeff.
People who have that strong leadership and vision and way of communicating.
I think that simultaneously to the vision of what we're trying to go for and really helping people visualize that and picture that is knocking the footing out of what they're holding on to. And so I've been working hard to try to kind of focus attention on how.
We got time afterwards. Some people still have questions, but maybe we just wrap up with like any final thoughts that you guys have. We've run through here before, so we do stick to the time limit here. But I guess any final words or something else you want to say that didn't get addressed, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. It's been a really good session, so I appreciate it. My brain's melting right now, I think, a little bit. But, and we'll flip it up. We made you start all day long, so I'm going to make you start this time, boss man.
My final response, Aaron, would be in response to your very first question. So you're going to go back to a school of 1,100 middle schoolers with 80 teachers, and 60 of them are going to be skeptical of what you bring back. And how do you get traction? Chad asked me that question, your colleague, yesterday, and I said, I would plan a slice. I would plan an immersion experience rather than give them a PowerPoint show about why they should have to do new things.
Right.
And the things that would matter to me are, number one, that they feel respectful of them as professionals. That it not be, here's another way for us to tell you that you've been doing the wrong thing all these years. But a way that they feel respected, that they have a lot of core knowledge. And that somehow it tap into their noble selves, their better selves.
They're making just those small movements are the ones that need to be celebrated more than anybody else. Not the big dreamers that are getting the PR and the press. Those are great, but there's a reason you're a high flyer. But those teachers that are just doing something very small, we got to rock them like they're all stars, because those are the ones that all of a sudden that'll double, and people will follow them. They're not going to follow the big picture idea people, because that's daunting to the small detail 10 people.
Just like the students.
Yeah,
Same
and
thing
so
happens
it's
when you
just,
do that with students.
yeah. And like we were talking earlier, like Hallie, we're going to run a deep dive session at we're in charge of professional development next year as teachers, not as admin, which is awesome. And our first day is we're going to put them in the role of students. So that's what we're going to do it. That's it. So there's my action, and we'll see where it goes from there. So I'm pumped.
Thank you.
evaluation thing?
Yes, we
these
need
things
to
like-
do a feedback form.